welcome to this week's podcast of Fill in the Blank. I'm Ross Strader, and I'm here with my co-host, Keith Abels. And Keith, we're ready for podcast number 3 of Fill in the Blank.
We're veterans now.
Yeah, we are veterans. And from what I understand, you the records show we're international now.
We are. We are officially international. So I check out our stats fairly often, and I want to thank our listeners in California. I want to thank our listeners in Texas, in Virginia, in Michigan, and I want to thank our listeners in Germany. So we had a few downloads in Germany this week. I'm not sure who those folks are, but certainly appreciate you listening. And yes, it's official. Fill in the Blank is international. That's
exciting. Well, so this is Fill in the Blank, and we'd love to hear back from you. So you can email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com. That stands for Fill in the Blank Podcast. fitbpodcast@gmail.com. You can also communicate with us on Twitter at hashtag AskFITB. So you just put that hashtag on there, and it comes to us, and we'd love to engage you in conversation there. All right, so Keith, that's how they can communicate with us. And then there are some folks that have inquired about wanting to help support this podcast as it is up and running. How do folks do that?
Well, the best way to do it is through Patreon. And so you can go to patreon.com/FITB. So Patreon is patreon.com/FITB. And you can sign up to be a patron of our show. What that means is that you can show your support however it works for you. So we do have some patrons that have generously given to us and supported us, and we greatly appreciate that. And so you can do this on your terms, whether it's $1 a month for all the episodes you listen to. We're going to do this show weekly, $5 a month, $3 a month, whatever you're able to do, we certainly appreciate. So if you're able to give $5, it really goes towards the overhead that we have in producing the show. If you can do $1, that's great too. If you're not in a position to do anything right now, we totally understand. We appreciate you listening. So patreon.com/FITB.
That's right. And keep listening. We want you to keep listening. We want to continue to hear your feedback. This is a work in progress. So I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this podcast. It's two guys who are friends, and when we would get together, we'd have lunch or coffee, or our families would be together. When that happened, we'd be talking about many of the same things we're talking about here. And we have decided to take this conversation into a larger realm, because if we're interested in it, the chances are you're interested in it as well, too. So we do want you to be a part of the conversation. So Keith, the last couple of weeks, we've talked about a couple of topics. So the first topic we talked about was the concept of self-driving cars. What does that look like in the future? And we followed up with a little news from last week. We might have some this week. And then last week, we talked about the future of the smartphone and what's next on the horizon as far as the smartphone technology, and how does that incorporate into our lives, the things we're doing with smartphones. Will we be doing some of those things with different devices? And is smartphone a part of the friction that that'll be diminished as we move forward and software becomes more sophisticated to do some of the things that we do on an everyday basis, but maybe we don't want to have those bricks in our hands and in our pockets. And, is there a next step, a next iteration? So that's what we talked about last week. And I know that these are topics that you follow, during the week on your Flipboard, on your news feed, and things like that. So of those two topics, they are relevant. What'd you see the last couple of weeks over, just those two things?
Well, if you think back to episode 1, self-driving cars, you brought up the point, Ross, rightly so, that self-driving cars could help folks that can't afford transportation now, or they take public transportation, or don't have reliable, consistent transportation. And there's a great article that came out this week in PC Magazine, How Self-Driving Cars Could Help the Underprivileged. So it's a good read. If you have a few minutes, I'll put this in the show notes, and so you can just link directly to it. But this was not something that I had thought about when we had this discussion, and you brought this up. And I think it's an important part of that discussion for sure. So it makes a lot of sense that self-driving cars can provide consistent, reliable transportation to folks that can't necessarily afford that. And that'll be a really interesting thing to keep an eye on. Another thing that happened this week over at Patently Apple, it's a great website where everything Apple patents is available on this site. It's a really cool website. I'll link to this as well. Following up from last week, our discussion, we talked a little bit about AirPods and the Google Pixel Buds. Apple patented this week biometric AirPods. And so if you look at the patent that they have, it's listed as sports-oriented AirPods with biometrics and noise cancellation features. So there's a lot to this particular patent. I'm not going to go through it all now, but this certainly gives you an idea of where they're headed with AirPods, and not necessarily just to listen to music or to podcasts. So a lot more to those.
So we just found out a whole lot about you, that you look at the patentlyapple.com website periodically and read about patents. So it's an interesting thing to know about you. I'm glad to know that about you. But so
some people hang out with their families.
Yeah.
Some people go for walks. I read Apple patents.
Family time, Apple patents. They're hard to balance that scale. Hey, but just real quick though, biometric AirPods, how is that? So what does the biometric add to the current AirPods people have sticking in their ears right now?
So you can do a lot, as it turns out, and I'm going to do my best to kind of tell you some of these things, because I'm certainly not a medical expert. But let me just read you a little bit from the patent, or from this article, okay? Because it would be better than me explaining it to you. So Apple noted that, and I'm in my air quotes now, so this is a quote from Apple. In some embodiments, biometric sensor can take form of it's a PPG sensor. I'm not even going to pronounce what it stands for. A PPG sensor utilizes a pulse oximeter to illuminate a patch of skin and measure changes in light absorption of the skin. The pulse oximeter, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, can include one or more light emitting devices and one or more light collecting devices. Okay, so that's part of it. By capturing waveforms associated with the cycling perfusion of blood to the skin, multiple biometric parameters can be collected, including, for example, heart rate, blood volume, and respiratory rate. So all of that to say is when you put this, or from the ear, you can get heart rate, and I think it's much more reliable this way than the way they do it on the watch. Blood volume and respiratory rate. Those are just some of the things this particular biometric sensor can do.
Well, that's interesting because, I noticed in the last years when I take my kids to the pediatrician, they actually take their temperature from their ear now. I mean, they got that device, put it in their ear. So probably more than being able to tell what your temperature is, there's Apple's banking on a whole host of feedback you can get from that part of the body, and I guess build in their AirPods to be able to read that data.
Right. So this, there's more to it than that, but it looks like the way that they've phrased this, sports-oriented AirPods, it looks like their first version of these anyway will be directed at, athletes, runners, those sorts of things. And it kind of makes sense if it's measuring heart rate, respiratory rate, all those sorts of things. But you could easily see where if you follow this through, that this could be applied to all sorts of health-related issues. So now I should say, just because they filed a patent and were approved for this particular patent or granted this patent does not necessarily mean they're going to make this, right? So companies patent things all the time that never materialize. And so along with the biometric AirPods, they also got a patent for a foldable iPhone. So maybe someday you'll be folding your iPhone. I don't know.
That's crazy.
And some other things, touch and hover sensing device. The picture, the image kind of looks like an iPad size thing. So they've got some interesting things. A magnetic iPad stand they got a patent for. All kinds of things. So we'll link to this and you can go check it out, but some pretty interesting stuff.
Nonetheless, Apple's working on all kinds of different concepts and ideas. All right. So, and from the mailbag, if that's what we want to call it, our digital mailbag, we had I know a suggestion that came through this week on through Twitter at hashtag AskFITB. So that question was related to the future of banking and blockchain. And so Keith, for those that aren't initiated into blockchain, how would you best describe that? And how does it compare to Bitcoin, and what does that look like?
So this was from Tim Walker. So Tim, thanks for getting in touch with us on Twitter using hashtag AskFITB. So he says, what about an episode on blockchain, a possible savior or an end to the banking industry? So most people have heard of Bitcoin, right? And so Bitcoin is a digital currency. Blockchain is the technology behind that. And so blockchain, simply put, is an open ledger. So it allows for the tracking of Bitcoin, or let's just say money, right? So it can track every transaction, and it's almost impossible to tamper with. So what that means is it gives you an accurate accounting for how this money or Bitcoin or whatever you want to call it is being moved around and who has what. I don't necessarily know. There is a discussion, and this is on our to-do list of the future of money. And whether Bitcoin survives or not, I don't know. And there could be some other currencies that take its place. I think what does survive for sure is blockchain and the technology behind it, because there are a lot of people that are mainly interested in blockchain because of the accuracy that it provides, for now we'll call it tamper-proof methodology that it uses. So blockchain is very interesting, certainly something we're going to keep our eye on. I could see banks and credit card companies and anybody that's tied to the financial industry certainly using blockchain. I don't know that means it's an end to banking. I don't know that governments and banks are going to let their control of centralized currency go easily.
Yeah.
But this technology could certainly be incorporated into that. That's a great question. We could probably talk an hour just on that. So Tim, stay tuned for an upcoming episode, because we do have on our radar the future of money.
Yes. In fact, we can include that show in kind of the future of the end of the world, right? When everybody goes to one world economy and one world government and those sorts of things. Bitcoin and blockchain kind of lays the foundation for that, right?
Oh, it does. Yeah. So you heard that here first. Blockchain equals end of the world.
No, we'll save that. The people hoarding resources to the end of the world, they're not listening to our podcast anyway.
Nope.
So, all right. Well, this show today, we are actually wanting to talk about what is a computer. And so we referenced it, I think last time we talked about the iPad commercial. It's a brilliant commercial. The little girl follows her around during the day as she's using her iPad, and then it closes. The end of the scene, end of the commercial, is a scene where she's laying on the ground in the backyard, and Mom comes out and says, "What are you doing on your computer?" And she looks up from the iPad and says, "Well, what's a computer?" And so we'll put the link to the I think it's on YouTube. We'll put the link to the commercial in the show notes. But it's a great commercial that highlights the evolving understanding of what a computer is. So I guess the first place to start when we're talking about what's a computer and what's next for computers, Keith, how would you answer the question, what is a computer?
Well, the literal definition, according to Mr. Webster, is an electronic machine that can store and work with large amounts of information. So that's about as generic as it gets right there. And that tells me that pretty much everything around you these days is a computer. I think an interesting question is, so we'll get to what computers are now and what we think they will become, but we had to start somewhere to get to this point. So I would throw that question back at you, Ross, and say, what have computers been up to this point?
Yeah, well, so, I think that's a great question. So in my lifetime, being the age I am, I typically think of, there were two iterations of computers. There was the computer, the kind of the big bulky computers that sat around on desks or, took up most of a desk space. Had these old sort of desktop computers with clanky keyboards. And you would see them show up in places, they would replace typewriters, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of word processing. There was the beginning of data management, but you were still using those old, the 3x5 floppy disks, and then you were using the harder disk and having to load programs, and everything was DOS-based. So that's, when I think about the beginning of computers in my lifetime, that's what my mind goes back to, a day where there weren't computers on every desk, and then there were. And then moving into, as we get into the, mid-late 90s, the costs of laptop computers coming down, and people moving to laptop computers. Although even when I had my first iterations of laptop computers, I also had a desktop computer. I didn't see the laptop as a desktop replacement for whatever reason in my life back then when I was in graduate school. But you go back further than that. You go back into the 60s and early 70s, when you had people like Litton and IBM, and they were, computers were the size of city blocks, and they were managing lots of data and crunching lots of numbers. In fact, you can go all the way back. I think, what the history begins, some even say in the 19th century, of, the first mechanical computers. Back then, they would, you could create a document, store letters and words digitally, and so you have that back in the 19th century. At the same time, throughout the war is the mother of invention many times, and so during World War I, you had actually people that were called computers. Rooms full of men and women that crunched numbers. They referred to them as the computers, those that were doing computing. And then, IBM comes along, and the machine's able to crunch those numbers faster and work with bigger numbers. And so computers were born out of the need to be able to manage more data and store more data than were humanly possible by a person or by a team of people. So to my best guess, that's the beginning of computers.
Well, I think that's a pretty good summary for sure. So I think it's safe to say we've made some progress since then. Yes?
Oh, yes, we've made a ton. If you just Googled images, type in first computer, you go back and you see these, these massive machines, which is what they were, and running on, small amounts of megabytes at the time, or kilobytes at the time. So they, by today's standards, they didn't have much capacity at all, but yet what they did was beyond what man could do alone.
Oh, for sure. So we started off with room-sized computers, went down to desktop computers, and now we're at the point where we're saying, what's a computer? I think maybe the question is, what's not a computer? There's, that may be a shorter list. So based on the definition of modern computing, we have laptop, we have desktop computers, you have tablets, you have smartphones. I would even say dumb phones are computers as well.
Yeah,
they just don't do as much as smartphones. Smartwatches. Then you've got intelligent speakers like the Echo and the Google Home. Your car is primarily operated by computers. And you can go on down the list. You could even now say refrigerators and, all these different appliances. My Nest thermostat is a computer.
Yeah.
I was serious when I said, what's not a computer?
Well, depending on what kind of coffee maker you have.
Well, that's true.
They got, you can set it for all kinds of things. It's built into so much of our life, isn't it?
It is. So I think it's safe to say that everybody kind of has in their head what they think a computer is. The question for this show and for this audience is, what does the current state of computing tell us about the future? So, the current state of computing, I kind of break it down into a couple of categories. You've got traditional machines like your Mac and your Windows laptops and desktops, right?
Yeah.
Then you've got Chromebooks. Ross, do you think the average person knows what a Chromebook is?
From my experience, no. I mean, I've seen Chromebooks. They always look appealing because of the price point, particularly when I think about my kids. But I've walked past them in a Best Buy. I've never bought a Chromebook. I've never worked on a Chromebook. So my feeling is no, but they haven't gone away from the market either.
No, they haven't. So Chromebooks make up 58% of the devices in U.S. public schools, grades K through 12. So if the average, 30-plus-year-old doesn't know what a Chromebook is, ask anybody that's still in grade school, so elementary, middle school, high school, and college. I would probably say that too. They know what a Chromebook is. They may not know the difference between a Chromebook and a non-Chromebook. It'd be an interesting question to ask someone of that age. And then you've also got now, that was just announced this week, Windows, or Microsoft is doing Windows using ARM processors. And an ARM processor is the type of processor they use in smartphones. So you're used to seeing inside a traditional laptop or desktop an Intel or AMD processor. ARM processors are the types of processors that are in your phones and tablets. So think Qualcomm. And that's important because to this point, you could not do traditional computing with ARM processors. And so there were several devices just announced this week, and we're not going to get into those, but they will use the Snapdragon, which is a Qualcomm processor. HP, Lenovo, Asus have all announced these Windows on ARM machine. But back to the Chromebook question for just a second. So those are kind of a couple different categories of kind of the current state of computing using the traditional form factors, Chromebook. So my daughter just turned 13, and her first computer we just got her is a Chromebook. And so she's using the Google Classroom suite at her school.
Because Chromebook, to be clear, it's a closed garden in that it's a computer that's running Google products. So you've got not only just the Google web browser, but you've got, which is where you check your Gmail and those sorts of things, and anywhere you can get to from a browser, I guess. But you've got built in there Google Docs and Google Calendar and Google Sheets and Slides and that sort of thing. It's kind of an ecosystem built around Google products. Is that right?
It is. So the Chromebook is interesting in a lot of ways, but if I were to explain it, let's say if I were to explain it to my mom, then I would say, a Chromebook, basically you open it up, you log into it, and everything that you do is in the cloud. So what I mean by that is if you save a file, it shows it's on your desktop. You don't really have a real desktop, though. All of that is in the cloud. So if I were to log into another Chromebook, let's say we switched computers, we both use Chromebooks, and I logged into yours and you logged into mine. Everything on that I see and everything that I have access to is exactly like I left it on mine.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So it's basically a virtual machine. So everything is done in the cloud or online, and you're not restricted. The beauty of Chromebooks is they are inexpensive, and it doesn't really matter whose you use. So they're great for classrooms because of the price and because anybody can log into it with their credentials and their desktop, and everything that they have is there instantly. So if you lose yours or it gets stolen or it gets broken, you get another one, you log in, everything's right there. So
if your life is cloud-based and you're not dependent upon having to go to the Apple Store and download a program or going to, some other site and download their program from there, if you don't have to use a third-party program, you can access it through a web browser. Chrome's a great device.
It's an awesome device. And what's really neat is that because Google has the Chrome OS, which is what powers the Chromebooks, and Android, on some of the newer Chromebooks, you have access to the Google Play Store. So it's basically everything that was available on Android is available on a Chromebook. So you've got a built-in marketplace there. So for example, you want to download the Netflix app. You can download the Netflix app from the Google Play Store on a Chromebook. So it mixes those two worlds. And so The Chromebook that we got my daughter, it can fold, back and turn into a tablet. It can do the tabletop mode. A lot of computers do that these days. It's a Samsung device, and it also has the little pen stylus that allows you just to take notes right on the screen, just like some Samsung phones do. You got access to the Google Play Store. It's a brilliant device, and it was 1/3 the price of the Mac that I'm recording on right now.
Yeah, so it's not a Mac OS, it's not a Windows OS. It's a Chromebook has their own OS, I guess.
They do. It's Chrome OS. That's exactly right.
Okay, Chrome OS. All right. Well, listen, that's fascinating. I should probably look into a Chromebook. I've got a kid headed off to college. I don't know what the needs are when you get there anymore, but that may be a great option for a kid going off to college.
I will say definitely this elementary school, if they're ready for a computer, that may not be, but if you have a couple of kids, this was one way that you could get one machine that they could all use, because remember, as soon as you log in, everything that you own and use is there. When you log out, it's not. Somebody else can log in, all their stuff's there. So it's great for a household that has several kids. So elementary school, middle school for sure. In most cases, I would say high school is probably okay. When you get to college, I've learned that is very college specific. So part of orientation these days, they will tell you the platforms that they use. And, so maybe not for college. I guess it depends on the school. But at the rate that they are dominating K through 12, I think it would only be a matter of time before they get higher education on board, just because you can do so much with these things and they are so inexpensive relative to Macs in particular. They're always updated. So you never have to do antivirus stuff. You don't have to do any of that. They're always updated. So they're very low maintenance. They're low cost, super flexible, and you can see why they own over half the market.
Dependent on being plugged into Wi-Fi, though, can you operate it offline?
You can. There are certain features that work offline. So you can do you can work on a spreadsheet, or if you're typing a paper, stuff like that. And all of that can save in an offline mode. And when you do have a connection, then it kind of syncs all back up. Ideally, you would want a constant connection with a Chromebook. It's not 100% mandatory, but it is a big part of how Chrome OS works.
All right. Well, listen, just to be clear, this is not a show on Google. This is Fill in the Blank podcast with Ross and Keith. And you can communicate with us. You can email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com, or you can join the conversation on Twitter with hashtag AskFITB. Particularly if you are a Chromebook user and sold that man, that's the way to go. I personally would love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about how you're using a Chromebook. If you're a professional post-college, living in the real world, how does Chromebook interface with your life? And, what's that like as a computing platform for you? So you got Chromebook, Keith, you talked about that. You talked about the Windows ARM machine. What exactly will somebody expect if they buy one of those and open it up? Is it going to be a similar kind of concept to the Chromebook?
Well, I think this is a little different. The Windows ARM machine should not really operate any differently than a traditional Windows computer. So I don't know that it's necessarily a cloud-based thing like a Chromebook is. I think it's just a shift towards more mobile-like hardware. So to me, this looks like, I'll give you a specific here. So if you have an ARM processor, or instead of say an Intel processor, those things are certainly much more efficient. They're not quite as powerful at this point, but you can run those things. They require less battery. They don't produce as much heat. When you look at the kind of traditional physical restraints of processors, battery and heat are the two big things you need to worry about, right? Yeah. So when you're working on your laptop and you hear the fans kick in, or you've been working for a while and you pick it up to put it in your bag and your thing is really hot, your laptop is really hot, heat and dissipating that heat, and then battery to power that processor, those are the two things that you really have to be worried about. And so when you, for example, are on your phone or your tablet, every now and then you'll feel them get kind of warm if you've been on them for a while, but not nearly like a computer does. So moving to ARM gives you much better battery life, less heat to deal with. So you can think about what that means is you can really start shrinking the the machine itself. And so Apple's done this already in their MacBook, not their MacBook Pros or their MacBook Airs, but they have a MacBook, right? That's their super thin one, even thinner than what they'd made before. And they use a different kind of processor in there. They don't use a traditional Intel processor. They use a processor that they've kind of designed, and it's a mobile processor. So it's kind of like what Windows is doing here. It's not technically an ARM processor, though I don't think it is in the MacBook. But it does look like this is Microsoft's attempt to kind of move in that same direction. Not necessarily cloud-based, all cloud-based like Google's Chromebooks are, probably more like what Apple is doing with the MacBook hardware-wise. So I would say Chromebook's all about the software. This Windows announcement is more about the hardware.
Okay. But it tells you, even as software becomes more sophisticated, as more of our life happens in the cloud, more of the things we do end up being cloud-based, the hardware needs are actually coming down as the software is becoming more sophisticated and more powerful.
It absolutely is. So, we, back to the last episode, there was a quote from Johnny Ive talking about the iPhone 10. And his sentiment was that the iPhone 10 is going to continue to change over time because of software, right? So we're at a point now where software is becoming much more important than hardware. Over the course of computing, we've done these leapfrogs where the hardware got so good that we had to push software to kind of keep up with it, right? So now that the hardware's gotten to a certain point, we can develop software to take advantage of that hardware. And then software would start pushing the boundaries of the hardware. And then you'd go back through that cycle again, and it would push hardware. And so you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The thing is with hardware, and if you apply Moore's law about everything getting, twice as fast at half the cost, every couple of years or so, hardware has gotten to a point where we have such powerful computing, just hardware-wise, that software is really what will dictate most things. So, for example, the next wave of computing being intelligence, that is, that the hardware is there, right? It's all about the software now, right? To make that work. And so, really, what some of these things tell me. So the success of Chromebooks, if you look at what Microsoft is doing, trying to moving their devices to a mobile hardware platform, Apple is kind of doing both of these a little bit at a time. With you look at how they're managing photos in the cloud, music in the cloud, desktop in the cloud. If you've upgraded your Mac OS the last couple of times, they've moved to kind of your desktop in the cloud. So they're kind of slow walking their way towards it too. But I think clearly this tells us the future of computing is in the cloud, right? So it's not there's no particular format that wins. The cloud wins.
So it's interesting when you think about the question, what is a computer and moving forward. I guess one of the things that subconsciously I think about, and I'm thinking through it right here as you were talking about the Chromebook and as we talk about moving forward, part of what I think is a criteria for me in thinking about what is a computer, just, offhand, it has a keyboard. But in many of these things with the internet, with things being on the cloud, you really could be, the future of computers could be just, tablets of glass, apart from keyboard, apart from any externals. And, you just, our kids will carry around these tablets of glass, and then the design of the glass, whether they're see-through, as you see in movies, that depict the future, or just, they get lighter, or they, become different size, maybe a square. So I don't know. But really, in many ways, if you're inputting long documents, things like that, you need a keyboard. But so much of what we do, we do through touch, we do through, navigating one place to the other, reading, consuming, that sort of thing.
Let me ask you a question.
All right.
Is the Amazon Echo a computer?
Yeah, it has to. Yeah, it is. And it's something it doesn't even have a screen, does it? You just talk to it.
Or a keyboard.
Yeah, or a keyboard.
Or a mouse. It has no input. Well, it does have input. It's voice. Where does the Echo do its processing? So when you ask it a question, where does it find the answer?
It's got to be from the the big Amazon warehouse where Alexa sits, right?
Yeah.
At her help desk.
The cloud. Yeah, the Alexa help desk. Yeah. But that's the point. So this is
That's a busy chick, man.
yeah, for sure. But so I mean that's so if you and I know computers as one thing, this commercial we started this discussion off with, although the little girl in the ad is on a screen and it actually has a keyboard and all those sorts of things, that kind of looks like what we would call computers. But we're well past the point where it's a screen and a keyboard, right? So, So we talked last time about the future of computing being immersive and without friction.
Yep.
There is zero friction in just talking to something in it, so you've got input output, right? Input is a question or a command or a statement, and the output is whatever the natural output would be. So, the thing finds you your information and tells you or plays the song or unlocks your door or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, we are past the point where you can easily say, what's a computer? I don't know how I'd answer that question today.
I don't either. And, if you think about Alexa, so just think about Alexa for a second, the Amazon Echo. So it's this small round piece of deal. You plug it into the wall, you connect it to your Wi-Fi. But if you think about really how powerful that is, so you couldn't download a program onto your computer's hardware and that computer have really the processing capability to do what Alexa is doing. I mean, your standalone computer doesn't offer you that much power that Alexa does, to be able to ask Alexa a question, she return in a, almost in a conversational manner, or say, I'm thinking about it, and, to answer that or to go to a song. You'd be very hard pressed to download anything on your computer standalone and then, disconnect it from the Wi-Fi and it have all of that knowledge.
You'd have Microsoft Encarta. Do you remember that? That was their encyclopedia.
Yeah.
That's what you would have.
Yeah.
How scary would
Alexa's
that be?
Far more powerful than that.
Yeah. So you'd get, you'd basically have an encyclopedia that your computer could run, and it would be static. There'd be no way to feed new information into it. And whatever was in there, just like when I was a kid, before we had computers, then we had a set of encyclopedias. And, at the time, that's all I had, right? You had the library that you could go to, but we used those encyclopedias, these World Book encyclopedias, like crazy. And the problem is, as you got older, it's like half of these, it's like I felt like I had them memorized, because when it was time to do a report on a certain topic, like, well, it's going to be one of these because that's what I have access to, right? That's what's in my encyclopedia, or whatever. And it's like, yeah, okay. So I just wrote hopefully slightly better versions of those over the years of the same stuff, but there was never really any new information in my encyclopedia because we had it for as long as I could remember, from when I was in elementary school all the way through high school.
Do you have an Echo?
I do.
So does it have the feature you can, say, hey, Alexa, remind me I put my keys in the top drawer, and it holds that as a note for you?
You can do that. I use my phone for those types of things. We use our Echoes, because we have them throughout the house. We use our Echoes to turn on and off lights, because we've got the Philips Hue bulbs.
Yeah.
We use I'll tell you this, that's great in the kitchen for a timer. When you just say set the timer, it's great for just play me some music. It is great for what's the weather, all sorts of things like that. Then you can, you enable on your Echo what they call skills. So think about an app. How would you load an app on a voice-only platform? They call those skills. So we have, a thing that says, tell me a Star Wars joke. You can enable this Star Wars joke skill, right? And so it's kind of funny. She'll tell you these Star Wars jokes. We've got one. I've got one. My kids aren't a fan of it. Dad jokes. Tell me a dad joke.
Okay. Comedy
gold. Well, it was to a certain point in my house. Not so much anymore. But there's thousands of skills. So I was helping a friend of mine recently. She's had her Amazon Echo for a while, and she's like, I don't know what all this thing can do. And so I showed her where to go look for skills, and she asked about recipes. She goes, oh, it says recipes. And I said, okay, let's try that one. So I taught her how to ask it for a recipe. And it gave her a recipe, and she liked that recipe. And then it says, would you like me to send this to your phone? She sends it to her phone. You open it up in the Alexa app, and there's her recipe, right? And so she's got it in front of her, or it can just say it out loud to her if she wants. So there's all kinds of things it can do. And what I would tell you is just, in order to kind of fully understand it, you just kind of got to jump in and start somewhere. So start with your interests. One of the really handy things it does is this thing called the flash briefing. And you get to decide what it tells you. So you can say, lady in the can. I don't like saying her name because all my stuff will go off. Lady in the can.
Yeah, I got you.
Right? Lady in the can. Hey, give me my flash briefing. And so what I've got in there, you can set certain news. So I've got like tech news, and I've got world news, things like that. I've got sports scores in there. So it will just run down, all the things that you want her to tell you during your flash briefing. So, it's good in the morning where you just say, play my flash briefing. And, she will say from the New York Times or whoever whatever news source you want. From this newspaper or this news source, here's the headlines, and she'll read the headlines to you. And, so I've got some tech stuff in there and some just general news topics in there. And then also, like I said, sports or other topical information, but you completely customize that flash briefing, and it can change throughout the day. So if you say, give it, play my flash briefing, and she does it in the morning, if you ask for the night, well, obviously some of that's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
In the evening. So it's just kind of always up to date with whatever is going on. So it's a pretty cool feature. If you don't have one, I'd at least spend the, $30 or $40 on the Dot, which is the little one, and just try it out.
Does it have the same capabilities?
It does. It's just smaller. It doesn't have the bigger speakers and, all the microphones in it that the tall one has. But now's a great time. This isn't a commercial for Amazon. But it is pretty cool. I have to warn you though, I started off with one. I think we're up to 5 now.
5. That's all right. So this is Fill in the Blank podcast. Like we said, it's not a Google infomercial, nor is it an Amazon infomercial. Although, man, those things are just built into our life. But this is Fill in the Blank. You can email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com, or you can join the conversation on Twitter at #AskFITB. But I would be fascinated to know, one, do you have one of these Alexa devices in your home? If you do have it in your home, how do you use it? Does it sit there? Is it just something that plays music, or do you interact with it for several different things that come across your life when you're at home? If you don't have one, is it on your Christmas list? Is this the season of gift giving that you'll find one in your home? And so, as we're talking about what is a computer, Keith, what's your favorite computer? So as you think about, all the different things you have as computers in your life, what's your favorite computer?
If you were to ask me that question a few years ago, I no doubt would say my Mac.
Yeah.
And although, honestly, I still like my traditional computer, I would have to say my favorite computer right now is my iPad Pro, the big one. So the 12.9 inch, is it? The bigger one. So I had the smaller iPad Pro, and I'm a fan of the Pros just in general because of the ease of the keyboard using their smart connector and the Apple Pencil, which I use all the time. And I'll be honest with you, what made it my favorite computer is not the hardware, although the Apple Pencil is really nice and I use it every day. iOS 11. So it comes back to the software really changed how I use this device. So the split screen capabilities, the dragging and dropping from one source to another, it is a great blend of traditional computing with new form factors and just a new kind of way of doing things with a mobile operating system versus a desktop operating system. I can't tell you the last day I went without using my iPad Pro heavily. It is what I use probably for 70% of my computing at this point.
Yeah.
So we record this show on my Mac, but my day-to-day, my iPad Pro.
Yeah, you could probably record it on your iPad Pro with similar quality. Although that's something we don't know yet. We're still figuring out some of those sound things. So let me ask you this, though. So you've got both the 12.9 inch, and then your other iPad Pro, is it the 9.7 or the 12 or the 10.5?
It's the 9.7. It was the original. So I have the original 12.9, which is the bigger one. So the first generation one.
Okay.
And then the first generation 9.7.
Okay. And why do you like the 12.9 over the 9.7? What, as you go to pick one up, what pulls you towards the 12.9?
iOS 11 and the side-by-side, so running two apps at the same time in the side-by-side mode, the screen real estate that gives you is so much better on the 12.9 over the 9.7.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost like you've got two iPads. If you're in landscape mode on your larger iPad and you've got two apps open next to each other, then it's almost like having two normal or standard size iPads in vertical mode side by side.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of screen real estate. And also, I do use the smart keyboard. I've gone through a million different keyboards, some Bluetooth keyboards. I do use the Apple smart keyboard because you never have to charge it and you don't have to pair it. It just makes it really easy. The size of that I like better. It's more of a kind of full-size, traditional sized keyboard over the one for the 9.7.
Right.
So that's the reason. It's just screen real estate.
So you use your 9.7. Is that what you read on? Is that what you watch Netflix on? What do you use that for?
Well, since iOS 11 came out,
Yeah.
I haven't really used it. I've just used my big one.
So it's for sale, is what you're saying?
Well, no. I have, we'll save that for another show. Let's just say no,
All right.
It's not for sale.
Not for sale. All right, good. All right, favorite computer. Well, I'd have to say for me, my iPad Pro is my favorite computer by far.
So we agree on that.
We absolutely do agree. So I still carry my laptop with me during the week, but I will increasingly, since iOS 11, will realize, man, I might go 3 or 4 days without ever opening my laptop. Now, I have a program that I run on my laptop that has an app. So there's an app parody for it on iOS 11, but the app is scaled down. It's by no means as powerful as the desktop program or the laptop program, and I do have to use that during the week. But that's about the only time I find myself using my laptop is when I'm having to work in one program. And when I'm working in that program, I do writing during the week. And so I'll, if I'm in that program, then I'll write in another program, and I'll do that on my laptop and still get around. But for my everyday email, my everyday writing, my, web searching, Twitter, all of those things, most everything else I do on my iPad Pro. And I very much like having the iPad, the pencil. I like, having the AirPods that, man, there's no wires. It's just a very convenient. So I may leave my laptop in the car, run into one place with a meeting, and all I ever take with me is my iPad Pro.
Agreed. Same here. Yep. So what do you think then your favorite computer will be in 10 years?
Wow. So I don't know. As far as I know, so I'm always going to have to write. There's always going to be a need to have a keyboard, I think, and to be able to write and do some research. So as best I can tell, it'll probably be something like an iPad Pro. My expectation is the program I'm tied to my laptop on will get better in a mobile environment, an iOS type of environment, or they'll move some of that to the cloud and you'll be able to access it through a browser. So, but I do foresee not just having a favorite computer. So say my iPad is my favorite computer. I do foresee there being a time that I might not have a traditional laptop. So I'm probably one iteration away in the program I use from not needing to replace my laptop for a long time.
Yep. Yeah, I think you may be right.
Yeah. What about you? So as you think about 5 years from now, what do you see your favorite computer being?
I think in the short term, yeah, the tablet's the way to go. I think past that, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe just my house. If everything's a computer, then,
Yeah.
you know, if it all just kind of works together, then could you have, like, there can't be just one.
No, that's
right?
true.
If everything's just kind of meant to kind of work in harmony. I guess my favorite one would be with whatever one I'm using at the time.
Yeah, that's as the ecosystems begin to pair more naturally with each other, and you morph into, you know, you've got one kind of ecosystem on your iPad, another kind of ecosystem in your home with your lady in the box. You've got your watch and your phones, but when all of those things communicate with each other, and so it's like opening up a Chromebook and logging in, and all your stuff is there, but it's there across all those environments. That's probably when we don't have a favorite device, but maybe more of a favorite environment.
I think you're right.
I much like working on my computer when I'm at home, you know, because I have access to more rather than when I'm at my office, because my office now is truly sort of a mobile site, and my home base is home. Maybe something like that.
So when you buy your next house or you move, you would say, what kind of house do you want? You would say, I think I want a Google house. No, I want an Apple house. Maybe an Amazon house. Is that what you're saying?
We're already doing that with our cars. So you go buy a new car. Do you want Apple's AirPlay built into it? Do you want, Microsoft built into it? So there's a sense in which we're buying our cars with those environments built into it. I have to absolutely believe it won't be devices that you that some of that will be built into your homes. Like when you used to have the old intercoms things built into your homes. You
right.
could have the kitchen, you could punch a button and talk to your kids' room, and we probably will begin to build that kind of ecosystem, digital computer ecosystem into our homes.
Well, spoiler alert, when you get your Amazon Echoes, they can be used as intercoms throughout your house.
Really?
Yes, from one room to the next.
Oh man! So it's like
how much would you pay for that? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just went on my Christmas list. As a matter of fact, you just sold me.
Yeah,
It
just takes one thing to get you excited about it, and then you unlock this whole world, and then you end up with them in every room and apologize to your wife.
Yeah, there you go. Hey Keith, this has been a great discussion talking about what is a computer, and listen, I'm glad to just find out more about the lady in the box, as you call her. So this is the Fill in the Blank podcast. This is going to be a wrap on episode 3. You can communicate with us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com. You can also join our discussion on Twitter at #AskFITB, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Tell your friends, tell your family about this podcast, and let us know how it is beneficial to you. Keith, what would you say as we wrap up?
I would say thanks for listening. Remember to support us on Patreon if you're able, patreon.com/FITB. And really appreciate all the listeners we have across the U.S. and now across the world.
All right, that's Fill in the Blank podcast, episode 3. Thanks for listening.